It was a warm Tuesday morning when Danielle Harris stepped out of the taxi in front of the Grand Royale Hotel, the golden letters on the building shining under the soft sunlight. She stood still for a moment, taking a deep breath, feeling the humid air of the city on her skin. She wasn't here as a rich businesswoman or as a powerful executive. Not today. Today, she wanted to see the world the way ordinary people saw it. Danielle had recently been chosen as the next CEO of the hotel chain. The announcement hadn't been made public yet. Only a few top executives knew. She had worked for years to reach this position, starting from the bottom as a front desk clerk. She knew every corner of the hospitality business. The smell of the fresh linen in the rooms, the long hours behind the reception desk, the polite smiles that sometimes hid exhaustion. She remembered it all, and she wanted to make sure her company still treated guests the way she once had, with real care and respect. The taxi driver asked if she needed help with her luggage, but she only had one suitcase and a simple leather handbag. "I'm fine, thank you," she said kindly, her voice calm and confident. She wasn't wearing designer clothes or expensive jewelry, just jeans, a soft white shirt, and sneakers. She looked like any other traveler, maybe even a little tired. That was exactly what she wanted, to blend in, to experience her own company's service without being recognized. As she walked through the hotel's revolving doors, a wave of cool air brushed against her face. The lobby smelled faintly of lavender and lemon. The marble floor reflected the lights from the chandelier. Everything looked perfect on the surface. She smiled, impressed by the elegance, but deep down, she knew that true hospitality was never just about looks. It was about attitude, warmth, and respect. She wanted to see if those qualities still lived here. At the reception desk, a young woman named Clara greeted her with a bright smile. "Welcome to the Grand Royale, ma'am. Do you have a reservation?" she asked. Danielle nodded, giving her the name D. Harris, her voice calm and polite. Clara quickly found her booking and handed her a room key card. "You're in room 214, ma'am. Enjoy your stay," she said. Danielle thanked her and made her way toward the elevator, feeling satisfied so far. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Danielle stepped inside. She noticed a small family beside her, a mother, father, and two little children. The kids were laughing and pressing all the buttons, their parents apologizing with embarrassed smiles. Danielle laughed softly. "Don't worry. I used to do the same when I was little," she said. The parents smiled back, and for a brief moment, the elevator ride felt warm and human. When she reached her floor, she pulled her suitcase down the hallway. The carpet muffling her footsteps, she unlocked her room, and the door swung open with a gentle click. It was a beautiful room. Large bed, clean sheets, a balcony with a view of the garden. Everything seemed perfect, but Danielle wasn't here for luxury. She was here to observe, to feel what her guests felt. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked around, noting the details, the placement of the lamp, the welcome note on the table, the fruit basket near the window. After a few minutes, her stomach growled softly. She realized she hadn't eaten since morning. She decided to go downstairs to the hotel restaurant for breakfast. It would be her first real test. How the staff treated a regular guest. She brushed her hair, fixed her shirt, and walked toward the elevator again, this time with quiet curiosity. As she entered the restaurant, the atmosphere changed. It was bright and busy. Waiters moved quickly between tables, carrying trays of food and coffee cups. The sound of clinking plates and quiet chatter filled the air. She waited at the entrance, expecting someone to greet her, but for a few moments no one did. Finally, a young waiter noticed her and walked over, his expression tired, almost irritated. "Table for one?" he asked without looking her in the eye. "Yes, please," she replied gently. He nodded and led her to a small table near the window. Danielle sat down and looked outside. The garden view was peaceful. Small trees, flowers, and a fountain glistening in the sunlight. She smiled softly, trying to enjoy the moment. But she could already sense the difference in how she was being treated compared to other guests. She noticed how the waiter spoke cheerfully to a couple nearby, offering them menu suggestions and smiling widely. Yet when he came back to her table, his tone was flat, his body language distant. "Can I get you something to drink?" he asked in a hurry. "Just some water, please," she replied. He left without another word. She watched quietly, thinking she wasn't angry but disappointed. She knew this kind of subtle behavior too well. The way some staff judged guests by their looks, skin color, or clothes. She remembered how years ago, when she worked as a front desk clerk, she had promised herself to never treat anyone differently. Now, sitting in that restaurant, she felt the sting of that broken promise. When her water arrived, she thanked him. But he didn't respond, only nodded and walked away. Danielle sighed quietly, reminding herself to stay calm and patient. She was here to learn, not to scold. She took out her small notebook and wrote a few words. Attitude before service, underlining it twice. She didn't know yet that this simple breakfast would become a lesson not only for her staff, but for the entire company. As she sat there waiting for her meal, she thought about how strange life could be. How one moment you're being ignored and the next, you hold the power to change everything. Danielle smiled faintly, sipping her water. She was ready for whatever came next. She just didn't know that by the end of this day, one waiter's careless attitude would turn into a story people would talk about for years. Danielle sat quietly by the window, the sunlight slipping through the glass and landing softly on her table. She had chosen this spot because it gave her a full view of the restaurant, a perfect place to observe everything without drawing attention. The hum of morning conversation filled the room, people laughing, sipping coffee and chatting about their travel plans. It was supposed to be a peaceful breakfast, but the air already felt a little heavy around her table. The waiter returned. His name tag said Ryan. He looked young, maybe in his mid-20s. His face was handsome, but his expression bored. He didn't smile, didn't make eye contact, and his shoulders drooped as if he wanted to be anywhere else. "Are you ready to order?" he asked quickly, his voice sharp like he was in a rush. Danielle looked up politely and said, "Yes, please. I'll have the breakfast set, eggs, toast, and fruit," she smiled. But Ryan only scribbled something on his notepad without looking up. "Anything to drink?" he asked. "Just orange juice, thank you," she replied softly. He nodded once and walked away without another word. Danielle leaned back in her chair, watching him move to another table. His mood changed instantly when he spoke to a group of businessmen sitting nearby. His smile returned, his voice warm and full of charm. He even joked with them about the weather. It was clear he knew how to be polite. He just chose not to be. At least not with her. Danielle sighed quietly. It wasn't the first time she had seen something like this. When she was a young hotel employee, she had seen how some workers treated guests differently based on appearance. A fancy suit or an expensive watch could buy you respect. But if you looked ordinary, or if your skin was darker, and suddenly, the tone changed. She remembered those moments well, and they had always made her heart ache. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Her food still hadn't arrived. She noticed other guests who had ordered after her already eating. Ryan passed her table several times, pretending not to see her. She decided to wait patiently. She wasn't here to complain. She was here to understand, to see the truth with her own eyes. Finally, Ryan came over carrying her plate. He set it down carelessly. The toast was burnt on one side. The eggs looked dry. And the fruit. The fruit had mold on it, small fuzzy spots on the strawberries. She blinked slowly, not because she was shocked, but because she couldn't believe such a thing could happen in a hotel under her company's name. She looked up at Ryan, her voice calm but firm. "Excuse me. I think the fruit might be spoiled," she said. Ryan glanced at the plate, shrugged and said, "It's just a bit soft." "It's fine," his tone dismissive. As if she were bothering him, Danielle kept her composure. "I don't think it's safe to eat," she said politely, hoping he would understand. But he rolled his eyes slightly, sighed and muttered, "Some people are just too picky," before walking away. For a moment, Danielle sat frozen, not out of anger, but disbelief. The restaurant grew quieter around her as a few nearby guests noticed what had happened. She could feel their eyes on her. The soft whispers behind coffee cups. She didn't respond. She simply looked at the plate again, the mold shining faintly in the sunlight, and took a slow breath. Inside, she felt a mix of sadness and disappointment, not for herself, but for the staff, for the hotel, for the brand she had spent years helping to build. This wasn't just about food. It was about attitude, respect, and humanity. She thought of her late mother, who used to say, "How you treat others when no one's watching shows who you really are." Danielle smiled faintly at the memory. Her mother had worked as a hotel cleaner for 20 years. She had taught her that no job was small if done with pride and kindness. Danielle raised her hand gently to call another waiter. A young woman named Mia came over, her face kind and nervous. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" she asked softly. Danielle nodded toward the plate. "I think there's a problem with the fruit," she said. Mia looked closely and gasped. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. This shouldn't have happened," she said quickly. "I'll fix it right away." She picked up the plate carefully and hurried to the kitchen. Ryan returned a moment later, frowning. "You didn't have to call someone else." I was handling it, he said coldly. Danielle looked at him, her tone still gentle. You were busy, so I asked for help, she said simply. Ryan scoffed under his breath. Some people just like to make a big deal out of nothing, he muttered. Loud enough for her to hear, Danielle felt a quiet sting in her chest. But she refused to lose her calm. She had faced tougher situations in boardrooms and negotiations. She wouldn't let disrespect shake her grace. She looked at him and said softly, I don't think treating guests with kindness is ever a big deal. Her voice steady. Ryan didn't respond, he just turned and walked away. Mia soon returned with a fresh plate. Everything neatly arranged. Here you go, ma'am, and again. I'm really sorry about earlier, she said kindly. Danielle smiled warmly. Thank you, Mia. I appreciate your professionalism, she said. The young woman smiled shyly before leaving. Danielle took a small bite of the new breakfast. It tasted fine, but her appetite was gone. She took out her small notebook and wrote again. Attitude reveals truth, she underlined it twice. She knew that what had just happened wasn't about one rude waiter. It was about something deeper, something in the culture that needed to change. As she finished her juice, she glanced once more at Ryan across the room, laughing and chatting with other guests. He didn't even glance her way. He had no idea who she really was, no idea that the woman he had brushed aside would soon hold the power to shape his entire career. Danielle smiled faintly to herself, not out of revenge but out of quiet purpose. She whispered in her mind, let's see how you act when the truth comes out. And with that, she stood, left a small tip for Mia, and walked out of the restaurant with calm grace, unaware that this simple breakfast would soon become a lesson that would echo through every corner of the Grand Royal Hotel. Danielle walked slowly back to her room, her mind calm but her heart heavy. She had come to the Grand Royal to quietly observe the service, to see the truth behind the polished smiles and elegant walls, but now she had seen something deeper, something she wished wasn't real. She changed into a fresh outfit and decided to go back downstairs for a cup of coffee. She wanted to see if what happened earlier was just a bad moment, or if it was part of something bigger. The restaurant was still half full when she entered again. Ryan was standing behind the counter, wiping glasses and chatting with another waiter. When he saw her, his smile faded and his posture stiffened slightly. He clearly wasn't happy to see her again. Danielle gave a polite smile and took a seat at the same table by the window. She liked that spot. It gave her space and silence. She waved her hand gently, trying to get his attention, but Ryan pretended not to see her. After waiting for a few minutes, she called out softly, Excuse me. Ryan looked over slowly, as if disturbed from something important. Yeah? He replied, not even walking closer, his tone dry and careless. Danielle stayed calm. May I please have a cup of coffee? She asked. Ryan sighed loudly, nodded and said, Sure, before walking off without writing anything down. Danielle watched him go, noticing the difference in how he spoke to other guests. His tone changed completely when talking to people he thought were important. There was laughter, warmth, and energy in his voice then, but with her, it was always cold, always distant. She knew the reason. She could feel it in the air. It was that quiet kind of prejudice people didn't always admit to, the kind that hid behind politeness. Her coffee arrived after a long wait. The cup was half filled. The saucer had a small coffee stain. She looked at it for a few seconds, wondering if it was even worth saying anything. Finally, she decided to give Ryan one more chance. Excuse me, she said kindly. Could I have a napkin, please? He didn't answer. He simply walked away to serve another table. A couple sitting nearby looked at her with sympathy. The woman whispered, That's so rude. Danielle gave a small smile and whispered back, It's okay, but deep down it wasn't okay. It was far from it. She had worked in this industry for over 15 years, and she knew that hospitality wasn't just about serving food. It was about dignity, respect, and kindness, something that couldn't be faked after a few minutes. Ryan came back and dropped a napkin on her table without saying a word. It landed halfway on her cup, spilling a bit of coffee onto the table. He didn't apologize, just turned and walked away again. Danielle took a deep breath and reminded herself to stay composed. Her goal wasn't to fight, it was to understand. She wanted to see how deep this carelessness went. A few minutes later, she noticed something strange. The waiter was now serving a man who had just walked in wearing an expensive suit. Ryan's attitude was completely different. He was polite, quick, even charming. Good morning, sir. May I recommend our special breakfast platter today? He said with a smile. The change in tone was almost unbelievable. Danielle watched quietly, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. She had seen enough. She called him over one last time. "Ryan," she said gently. He turned, looking slightly annoyed. "Yes?" he said. "Could I please speak to the restaurant manager?" she asked calmly. Ryan frowned. "He's busy right now," he said sharply. "Maybe you can tell me what's wrong instead." Danielle looked at him, her expression calm. "No, thank you. I'd prefer to speak with the manager directly," she replied. Ryan shrugged and said, "Suit yourself," before walking off again. 10 minutes passed, then 15. No one came. Danielle sat quietly, watching the waiters move around. Whispering to each other, she noticed Ryan glance at her and laugh softly with another staff member. As if mocking her, she felt a wave of disappointment wash over her. Not anger, but deep sadness. She thought of all the times her mother had told her, "Never let someone's ignorance change your grace." She smiled faintly. Remembering those words, finally a woman in a black blazer walked up to her table. "Good morning, I'm the shift supervisor." "I heard you asked for me," she said politely. Danielle nodded. "Yes, thank you. I just wanted to mention that I was served moldy fruit earlier, and the service has been quite poor today," she said softly. The supervisor blinked in surprise, then smiled awkwardly. "Oh, I'm so sorry about that, ma'am. Sometimes our kitchen makes small mistakes." "It's been a busy morning," she said, her tone rehearsed. "We can offer you a free dessert as an apology." Danielle looked at her and smiled gently. "That's kind of you, but this isn't about dessert," she said. "It's about how guests are treated." The supervisor gave a nervous laugh. "Of course, ma'am, we'll speak to the staff," she said, obviously eager to end the conversation. Danielle nodded slowly. "Thank you," she replied. As the supervisor walked away, Danielle noticed Ryan smirking from behind the counter. Like a child who thought he had won, she smiled back. But her smile held something he couldn't read. Quiet power. She stood up, placed a small tip on the table for Mia, the kind waiter from earlier, and left the restaurant with calm grace. In the elevator, she looked at her reflection in the mirrored walls. She didn't look angry. She looked thoughtful, composed, ready. She whispered to herself, "They don't know yet," a small smile forming on her lips. But tomorrow they will. That evening, she sent a short message to the board's communication team, confirming that she would make her first official visit to the hotel the next morning. It was time to reveal who she truly was. The woman they had underestimated, the same woman they had disrespected, the same woman who, tomorrow, would walk into that conference room as their new CEO. The next morning arrived with soft golden light spilling through Danielle's hotel window. The city outside was waking up, cars humming faintly, birds calling in the distance. She sat on the edge of the bed holding a cup of coffee she'd made herself using the small machine in the room. She didn't want to go back to the restaurant, at least not yet. She wanted to clear her mind first. She was still thinking about what had happened the day before. She wasn't angry at Ryan, not exactly. She was disappointed. Not only in him, but in the system that allowed such behavior to exist. She thought about how people often changed their manners based on appearances, and how dangerous that could be in hospitality, a business built on equality and kindness. She had always believed that respect should never depend on skin color, clothes, or titles. She had seen too much discrimination in her life to ignore it. After finishing her coffee, she decided to visit the restaurant again, this time not as a hidden guest, but still keeping her identity private. She wanted to see how the management reacted when a simple customer raised a concern. She wanted to see if leadership at this hotel truly cared about guests, or if everything was just surface-level courtesy. When she entered the restaurant, it was quieter than the day before. Only a few tables were occupied. Ryan was there again, this time arranging cutlery on a nearby table. When he noticed her, his face tightened slightly, maybe from guilt, maybe from annoyance. Danielle gave a polite nod and took a seat near the counter. She didn't want food this time, only to speak with the manager. A few moments later, Ryan approached, his tone the same as before. "Are you eating again or just coffee?" he asked without a smile. Danielle met his eyes calmly. "Neither. I'd like to speak to your manager, please," she said. Ryan sighed, his shoulders dropping. "He's busy right now." "Like I told you yesterday," he replied. She tilted her head slightly, her tone still soft but firm. "That's fine, I can wait," she said. Ryan turned away, muttering something under his breath. Danielle couldn't hear the exact words, but the irritation in his voice was clear. He walked toward the kitchen and disappeared through the swinging doors. Minutes passed and no one came. 10 minutes turned into 15, then 20. She could see Ryan moving around serving other tables, laughing with guests, pretending not to notice her waiting. Finally, Danielle called over another staff member. The same kind waitress, Mia, who had helped her before. "Excuse me, dear," she said warmly. "Could you please let your manager know I'd like to speak with him?" Mia nodded quickly, her eyes worried. "Of course, ma'am. I'll let him know right now," she said and hurried off. A few minutes later, the restaurant manager appeared. A tall man with slicked back hair and an expensive-looking watch. His smile was polite but faintly forced. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm told there was a problem," he said. Danielle nodded. "Yes, I wanted to discuss an issue I experienced yesterday," she said calmly. He glanced around nervously as if already distracted. "I'm very sorry to hear that, but we've been extremely busy. Could you tell me what happened?" He said. Danielle explained everything, her tone calm, steady, not emotional. She told him how she had been served moldy fruit, how the waiter dismissed her concerns, and how she had waited a long time for help. She didn't raise her voice, but the weight of her words filled the air. The manager nodded a few times, glancing at his watch. I see, he said repeatedly. "That's unfortunate. Sometimes small mistakes happen in a big hotel, you know." Danielle leaned back slightly, watching his face carefully. He didn't seem shocked. He didn't even look surprised. His tone was more about getting the conversation over with than about fixing a problem. "I understand mistakes happen," she said softly. "But disrespect shouldn't." The manager smiled awkwardly. Of course, we'll speak to the waiter, and I can offer you a free dessert or drink voucher for the inconvenience," he said, pulling a small card from his pocket. She looked at the card lying on the table, a pale slip of paper with the hotel's logo on it, the kind of gesture that looked polite but meant nothing. "Thank you," she said, taking it gently. "But I'm not here for free dessert. I'm here to see how much you care." Her words hung quietly in the air. The manager blinked, clearly not understanding what she meant. He forced another smile. "We value all our guests, ma'am," he said quickly. "I assure you we'll take care of it." Danielle nodded, though she could see in his eyes that he didn't mean it. It wasn't anger she felt anymore, it was realization. Realization that the problem wasn't just one rude waiter. It was an entire attitude from top to bottom. A lack of empathy, a lack of accountability. She had worked for years building a company that stood for warmth and dignity, and now she was seeing cracks in its foundation. Before she could respond, Ryan appeared behind the manager, pretending to wipe a table, his smirk small but visible, as if confident the situation was over. The manager didn't even notice. "We'll make sure it doesn't happen again," he said quickly. Already turning to leave, Danielle smiled faintly. "I'm sure you will," she said quietly, her tone calm but layered with meaning he couldn't grasp. As the manager walked away, Mia returned nervously. "I hope everything's okay, ma'am," she said softly. Danielle gave her a warm smile. "Yes, thank you. You've been wonderful," she said, and Mia smiled, relieved. When Danielle left the restaurant that morning, she didn't feel sad or angry anymore. She felt ready, her heart steady, her mind sharp. She now had every answer she came here for. She had seen how her employees behaved when they thought no one important was watching. She had seen how leadership ignored small disrespect, how arrogance went unchallenged, and how kindness still survived quietly in the hearts of people like Mia. As she stepped into the elevator, she whispered to herself, "Tomorrow, everything changes." Her reflection in the mirrored wall looked calm and confident, her eyes steady like someone who had just confirmed a truth she had suspected all along. She would return in the morning, not as a guest, not as a silent observer, but as the new CEO of the Grand Royale Hotel, and she would make sure everyone, from the manager to the waiter, understood what respect truly meant. The next morning arrived brighter than ever. Sunlight poured across the marble floors of the Grand Royale Hotel lobby, bouncing off the golden railings and crystal chandeliers. The air smelled of fresh flowers and polished wood. Staff hurried back and forth, straightening decorations, adjusting their uniforms, and whispering quietly among themselves. There was excitement in the air. Word had spread that the company's new CEO would be visiting that morning. Though no one knew who it was yet, Ryan stood behind the counter near the restaurant entrance, his tie slightly crooked but his smirk confident. He was trying to look busy, arranging napkins that didn't need arranging. The manager, Mr. Collins, kept checking his watch nervously, fixing his hair in the reflection of the silver coffee urn. "Everyone, make sure you smile and stand straight when the CEO arrives," he said. his voice sharp but trembling with anxiety. "This visit is very important. We can't afford any mistakes." Danielle arrived quietly, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, her hair pulled neatly back, her face calm, elegant, and composed. Gone was the simple traveler in jeans. Today she looked every bit the leader she had worked her whole life to become. As she stepped through the revolving doors, the staff instinctively straightened, not recognizing her at first. Her heels clicked softly on the marble, each step graceful and steady. Clara, the receptionist from her first day, greeted her with a bright professional smile. "Good morning. Welcome to the Grand Royale, ma'am. Do you have an appointment?" she asked cheerfully. Danielle returned the smile. "Yes, I do," she said. "I'm here for the executive meeting." Clara nodded politely and gestured toward the elevators. "Of course the meeting room is ready on the 10th floor, she said. Ryan, who was nearby, glanced up when he heard her voice. His expression froze for a moment. Recognition flickered in his eyes. His face went pale. He blinked twice, trying to understand what he was seeing. The woman he had dismissed and disrespected 2 days ago was now walking through the lobby like someone in command. His chest tightened, his confidence vanished. He whispered to the waiter beside him, "That's her. That's the woman from the restaurant." The waiter looked confused. "Who?" Ryan whispered harshly. "The one I served didn't serve properly." The words stuck in his throat. Mr. Collins hurried toward Danielle, his face tense but eager. "Good morning, ma'am. Are you one of the executives joining us?" he asked politely. Danielle looked at him for a moment, her calm gaze making him slightly uncomfortable. Then she smiled faintly. "Yes, something like that," she said kindly. "Let's head to the meeting, shall we?" The elevator ride to the 10th floor was silent except for the soft hum of the machinery. Mr. Collins tried to make small talk. "I must say, the hotel is honored to welcome the new CEO today. We've prepared everything," he said proudly. Danielle smiled politely. "I'm sure you have," she replied, her tone calm and unreadable. When the doors opened, several department heads were already waiting inside the conference room. The table was covered with neatly stacked reports, glasses of water, and notepads. Everyone stood as Danielle entered. Some assumed she was a senior executive or board member. No one yet realized she was the person they were waiting for. The chairman of the board, Mr. Everett, stood at the front and clapped his hands gently. "Good morning, everyone," he said. "As you all know, today is a special day. We're pleased to officially welcome our new Chief Executive Officer of the Grand Royale Group." He paused, smiling toward the door. "Please meet Ms. Danielle Harris." The room fell silent. Then the air seemed to freeze completely. All eyes turned toward Danielle. Ryan, who had been invited to serve coffee to the executives, nearly dropped the tray in his hands. Mr. Collins' mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. His face turned pale as if the blood had drained from it. Danielle stepped forward with quiet grace, her calm smile unwavering. "Good morning, everyone," she said gently, her voice strong and composed. For a few seconds, no one moved. The shock was too deep. Mr. Collins tried to speak. "Ms. Harris, I didn't realize," he stammered. Danielle turned toward him with a polite smile. "I know," she said softly. "You didn't." She looked around the room, her gaze landing briefly on Ryan, who stood frozen by the door, his hands shaking slightly, his once arrogant posture now small and unsure. "Please, everyone, have a seat," Danielle said, taking her place at the head of the table. "Before we begin, I'd like to share a small story," she continued, her tone calm but firm. 2 days ago, I visited this very hotel as a guest. No one knew who I was. I came quietly to see the kind of service we offer our customers. She paused, letting her words sink in. What I experienced was eye-opening. The managers exchanged nervous glances. Ryan looked down, pretending to focus on the tray. His fingers trembling, Danielle continued. "I saw kindness from some of our team members. Real, genuine kindness," she said, glancing briefly at Mia, who sat at the far end of the room, invited to represent the restaurant staff. But I also saw disrespect, indifference, and a lack of empathy from others. Her voice stayed even, but every word carried quiet weight. She placed her hands gently on the table. "The Grand Royale is not just a building with chandeliers and fancy rooms. It's a symbol of hospitality, respect, and dignity, and if we lose that, we lose everything," she said. The room stayed silent. Only the faint hum of the air conditioner filled the space. Ryan's breathing grew shallow. He felt sweat forming on his forehead. He wanted to speak, to apologize, but fear locked his voice. Mr. Collins adjusted his tie nervously. "Ms. Harris, I assure you this must have been a rare mistake," he began, but she raised a hand slightly, silencing him gently. "It wasn't just a mistake, Mr. Collins. It was a reflection," she said softly. "A reflection of what happens when we stop caring about the human side of our work." Her tone softened then, "But I believe people can learn, they can change. And that's why I'm here, not to punish, but to rebuild," she said, looking directly at Ryan now. "Every guest deserves respect, no matter how they look, where they come from, or what they wear." Ryan's throat tightened. He nodded quickly, his voice shaking as he whispered, "Yes, ma'am." Danielle smiled faintly, her expression kind but firm. "Good. Then let's begin a new chapter for the Grand Royale," she said. The room filled with applause, quiet at first, then stronger. And though many clapped out of relief, a few clapped out of genuine admiration. Danielle had walked in as a stranger, been disrespected as a guest, and now stood before them as their leader, calm, wise, and unshaken. And as Ryan watched her leave the room after the meeting, his hands still trembling, he knew he would never forget that morning. The day he learned that respect costs nothing, but means everything. The meeting ended, but the silence it left behind stayed heavy in the room. Even after Danielle had walked out, her words lingered like a quiet echo that refused to fade. Respect costs nothing, but means everything. Ryan kept hearing that line in his head, over and over. He couldn't shake it off. He stood near the back wall, still holding the empty coffee tray, his palms sweaty, his mouth dry. He wished he could go back in time and undo everything. Down the hall, the department heads gathered, whispering softly among themselves. No one expected the new CEO to be the same woman who had been quietly observing them days before. Mr. Collins, the manager, looked pale and uneasy. He kept tugging at his tie and mumbling, "She set us up." But deep inside, even he knew that wasn't true. Danielle hadn't set them up. She had simply revealed who they truly were when no one was watching. Later that morning, Danielle sat alone in her new office overlooking the city skyline. Sunlight poured through the tall glass windows. She sipped a cup of tea slowly, her thoughts calm but focused. She wasn't thinking about revenge, she was thinking about repair. She believed people could change if they were given a reason to, and she intended to make sure this hotel learned from its mistakes, not out of fear, but out of understanding. She picked up her phone and called the HR director. "Good morning, Lisa," she said softly. "I'd like to speak privately with two people this afternoon. Mr. Collins and a waiter named Ryan. Please schedule them separately." Her voice was calm but firm. Lisa hesitated for a second. "Of course, Ms. Harris. I'll make it happen," she replied quickly. A few hours later, Ryan stood outside the CEO's office, his heart pounding so loudly he thought the receptionist could hear it. He had barely slept the night before, and this morning's meeting had left him shaking. He had no idea what she planned to do. When Lisa opened the door and said, "You can go in now," his legs felt weak. Danielle looked up as he entered, her expression calm, almost kind. "Please, sit," she said gently. Ryan sat down slowly, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Do you know why you're here?" she asked. He nodded slightly. "Yes, ma'am," he whispered. "Because of how I treated you." Danielle nodded. "That's part of it," she said softly. "But it's also about understanding why you acted that way." Ryan swallowed hard, his voice trembling. "I don't have an excuse. Ma'am, I was tired, careless, and I guess I judged you," he said, his voice breaking a little. "I thought you were just another difficult customer." Danielle tilted her head slightly, her tone steady but gentle. "And what made you think that?" she asked. He hesitated, searching for the right words. "I don't know," he said quietly. "Maybe because you didn't look rich, you didn't talk like the usual guests who come here and act entitled." Danielle nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "So you treated me based on assumption," she said. "That's a dangerous habit, Ryan, especially in a business that exists to serve everyone equally." Ryan's throat tightened. "I know, ma'am, I realize that now," he said quickly. "I embarrassed myself and I embarrassed this hotel. I'm truly sorry." Danielle leaned forward slightly, her tone calm. "Do you understand what hurt me the most?" she asked. Ryan shook his head. "It wasn't the moldy fruit," she said, her voice low. "It was the way you dismissed me. The way you made me feel invisible every time I spoke. You acted like my words didn't matter. Ryan's eyes filled with tears he tried to hide. "I'm sorry," he whispered again. "I swear it'll never happen again." For a moment, there was silence, then Danielle smiled faintly. "I believe you," she said. "That's why I'm giving you another chance." Ryan looked up in surprise, his voice shaky. "You're not firing me?" he asked. Danielle shook her head. "No, but I'm assigning you to something new," she said. "You'll undergo intensive hospitality and diversity training under our new program. And then you'll help train others." Ryan blinked. Speechless. "You mean, you want me to teach others?" he said, confused. Danielle smiled. "Yes, because the best teachers are the ones who've made mistakes and learned from them." Ryan nodded slowly, relief and gratitude flooding through him. "Thank you, ma'am," he said quietly. "I won't waste this chance," Danielle smiled warmly. "Good, make me proud," she said softly, and with that, Ryan left the office feeling lighter than he had in days, not because he had escaped punishment, but because he had been given purpose. Later, Mr. Collins entered for his turn. He tried to sound confident. "Ms. Harris, I want to personally apologize for the misunderstanding," he began. Danielle looked at him steadily. "Mr. Collins," she said, "it wasn't a misunderstanding, it was neglect." His mouth opened, then closed again. She continued, "You didn't take responsibility when I came to you as a guest. You brushed it off like it was nothing. And that's not leadership." Her tone stayed calm but firm. "Leadership is about awareness, about setting a tone of empathy from the top." Mr. Collins swallowed hard. "You're right, Ms. Harris," he said quietly. "I should have listened." Danielle nodded. "Yes, you should have," she said. "But I'm not here to replace you. I'm here to rebuild with you. If you're willing to change," he looked surprised. "You'd still trust me to lead?" he asked. Danielle nodded. "Only if you learn to lead with humility," she said that evening. Danielle gathered the entire staff in the hotel's ballroom. The chandeliers glowed softly as everyone took their seats. She stood on the stage, her presence calm but powerful. "I want everyone to understand something," she said, her voice steady. "We all make mistakes, but what defines us is how we correct them. From this day forward, our company will be known not just for luxury, but for kindness." She paused, letting the silence settle. "We will start new training programs, new policies, and a new culture, one built on respect." The staff clapped, some quietly, some with real enthusiasm. Even Ryan joined in, his eyes bright with determination. As the crowd began to disperse, Danielle stayed behind for a moment, looking around the grand room. She could almost hear her mother's voice in her head, whispering, "Kindness is power." She smiled softly, realizing that accountability wasn't about punishment. It was about giving people the chance to become better versions of themselves, and that, she thought, was the truest form of leadership. The next few weeks at the Grand Royale Hotel felt like the beginning of a quiet transformation. Something in the air had changed. The tension that once floated through the hallways was slowly replaced with curiosity, reflection, and even hope. Danielle's words from that staff meeting echoed in everyone's mind. "Kindness is power," she had said, and people began to realize how deeply true that was. Ryan came to work earlier than usual now, his uniform always neat, his attitude humble. He had been assigned to a new training program created by Danielle herself. It wasn't an easy course, it was intense, focused on empathy, behavior, and communication. At first he found it uncomfortable, sitting in a room listening to lectures about respect and equality. But as the days passed, he started to understand. One morning the trainer, a kind elderly man named Mr. Lewis, said something that stuck with him. "Hospitality is not about serving food," he said gently. "It's about serving feelings. When a guest sits down, they give you their trust. Your job is to honor it." Ryan wrote that down in his notebook and underlined it 3 times. Every day after training, he practiced what he learned on the floor, greeting guests with a smile, remembering names, noticing small details, and listening, really listening. He apologized personally to Mia for how he had behaved, and she forgave him easily. "We all make mistakes, Ryan," she said kindly. "What matters is that you're changing." Her words gave him strength. Meanwhile, Danielle was busy at the top floor, reviewing every report, meeting with managers, and rebuilding the hotel's internal systems. She wasn't a CEO who ruled from behind a desk. She walked the halls, spoke to housekeepers, chatted with cooks, even helped the cleaning staff once just to remind everyone that no task was beneath her. Her humility surprised the employees. They had never seen a leader so approachable, so real. Mr. Collins, the manager, began to change too. The shock of being corrected publicly by Danielle had humbled him. But instead of bitterness, he found motivation. He started spending time on the restaurant floor, watching how guests were treated, taking notes, giving positive feedback, and even stepping in to help serve when the team was shorthanded. Little by little, the staff began to see him differently. One afternoon, Danielle walked into the restaurant quietly to observe again. She didn't announce herself. She just sat in the corner with a cup of tea. This time Ryan spotted her immediately, but instead of panic, he smiled genuinely. He approached her table. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said warmly. "It's good to see you again. Would you like your usual tea with lemon?" Danielle smiled, surprised that he remembered. "Yes, thank you, Ryan," she said softly. He brought the tea carefully, placing it perfectly on the table. The saucer clean, the cup full, the steam rising gently. "I hope you enjoy your afternoon," he said politely, then stepped away. Danielle watched him work for a few minutes. He moved with purpose now, confidence but not arrogance, his tone respectful, his smile sincere. It was like watching a completely different person. Later that evening, as Danielle was leaving the restaurant, Ryan approached her shyly. "Ma'am," he said, "I just wanted to thank you for not giving up on me." She turned toward him and smiled. "I didn't see a bad person, Ryan. I saw a person who forgot who he could be," she said softly. "Now you remember," he nodded, eyes shining. "I'll never forget again," he said quietly. The change spread beyond Ryan and Mr. Collins. Mia was promoted to senior waitress for her kindness and professionalism. The front desk team began smiling more genuinely, not because it was required, but because the work atmosphere felt lighter. Guests started leaving better reviews. Some even mentioned feeling warmly cared for, something that hadn't been said in months. Danielle noticed how even the smallest details began to shift. The staff lounge, once silent and tense, now buzzed with laughter and teamwork. People shared ideas, helped one another, and spoke proudly about their roles. The hotel began to feel alive again, not just like a building filled with employees, but like a family united by a shared purpose. A few weeks later, the company's headquarters sent an internal newsletter praising the Grand Royale for exceptional cultural improvement. The numbers showed increased guest satisfaction, lower staff turnover, and higher morale. Danielle smiled as she read the report, but she knew it wasn't just the numbers that mattered. It was the people, their growth and their hearts. Still, not everyone found the change easy. A few employees who refused to adapt quietly left, unable to adjust to the new standards. But Danielle didn't see their departure as a loss. She saw it as space for better energy, people who wanted to grow, learn, and treat others with respect. She believed that every challenge cleared a path for something stronger. One afternoon, Danielle held a small meeting with the restaurant team to celebrate their progress. She stood by the large windows as sunlight bathed the room in gold. "When I first came here, I saw a lot of walls," she said gently. "Not just the kind made of bricks, but the invisible ones in between people, between kindness and pride, between service and sincerity. And look at us now. Those walls are falling," the staff smiled. Clapping softly, Ryan grinned from the back, pride glowing in his eyes. After the meeting, Danielle walked through the hotel lobby, watching guests check in and staff greeting them with genuine warmth. She stopped for a moment near the front desk, her reflection catching in the polished marble wall. She thought about how everything had started, with a simple breakfast, a plate of moldy fruit, and one careless act that revealed so much. She whispered quietly to herself, "Sometimes disrespect is just the beginning of awakening." It wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about awareness, and she knew that this hotel, her hotel, would never be the same again. That evening, as the sky turned deep orange outside, Danielle sat in her office. Looking down at the bustling lobby below, she felt peace, not pride or victory, but peace, the kind that comes from knowing she had turned pain into purpose. She smiled softly, whispering, "This is only the beginning." As the lights of the city flickered alive one by one beneath her window. A few weeks later, the Grand Royale Hotel looked and felt like a different place. Sunlight streamed through the glass walls, bouncing off the marble floor and filling the lobby with life. Guests laughed softly over coffee, bellboys moved swiftly with smiles, and the staff carried themselves with quiet confidence. Everything felt lighter, warmer, more human. Danielle walked through the lobby, her steps calm, her eyes observant. taking in every small detail. She paused near the restaurant entrance, the same place where it had all begun. The memory of that first morning flashed in her mind, the cold service, the moldy fruit, and the quiet sting of disrespect. It felt like years ago, not weeks. So much had changed, not just in the hotel, but in the people themselves. She smiled softly, realizing that real change didn't start with policies. It started with hearts. Inside the restaurant, Ryan was working the breakfast shift, moving smoothly between tables, greeting guests with a genuine smile, his posture confident but humble, his tone respectful and warm. When he noticed Danielle standing at the door, he lit up immediately. "Good morning, Ms. Harris," he said cheerfully. "Would you like your usual table?" Danielle nodded. "Yes, please," she said, and followed him to the seat by the window, the same one she had sat at on her first day. The morning light poured over the table, and she watched as Ryan placed a fresh plate of food before her, the eggs fluffy, the toast golden and the fruit perfectly ripe. "Everything looks wonderful," she said kindly. Ryan smiled. "Only the best for our CEO," he replied, half joking, half sincere. Danielle laughed softly. "You've come a long way, Ryan," she said. "I'm proud of you." His eyes softened. "You gave me the chance to become better," he said quietly. "Most people would have just fired me." Danielle looked at him thoughtfully. "Firing you would have been easy," she said. "But change isn't born from fear. It's born from learning, and you learned." Ryan nodded, emotion flickering across his face. "Thank you for believing I could," he said, and walked away to serve another table as she sipped her tea. Danielle looked around the restaurant. Mia was now wearing a badge that read Senior Waitress. She moved gracefully, guiding the new staff, offering quiet advice and making sure guests were comfortable. Even Mr. Collins, the manager, could be seen at the counter helping a customer personally, his usual tension replaced with calm confidence. He had learned to lead with humility. Just as she'd hoped, Danielle's heart filled with a quiet sense of satisfaction, not the loud kind that shouts success, but the soft kind that simply feels right. She realized that true leadership wasn't about control. It was about connection, about showing people that respect was not a rule but a habit, something that lived in the smallest actions, like a smile, a thank you, or even an apology. When she finished breakfast, she stood up, leaving a generous tip, not because she had to, but because she wanted to show appreciation. Ryan noticed and smiled. "You didn't have to do that, ma'am," he said. She smiled back. "I know," she replied. "But gratitude is a habit too." Later that afternoon, Danielle walked through the hotel gardens, the sound of the fountain mixing with the soft rustle of leaves. She thought about her journey, from a front desk clerk years ago to the CEO she had become. She remembered the long nights, the difficult days, and the moments when she doubted herself. But what stood out most were the lessons her mother had taught her, simple but powerful. Treat people with kindness, even when they don't deserve it, her mother used to say, because kindness isn't about them. It's about who you are. She sat on a bench near the fountain, closing her eyes for a moment, listening to the soft splashing of water. She thought of how one bad breakfast had led to a whole movement of change. It was strange how life worked. Sometimes the worst moments carried the seeds of the best transformations. All it took was courage to look deeper, to stay calm when anger was easier. Later that evening, Danielle called for a small meeting with her senior team. When everyone gathered in the lounge, she stood by the large window where the city lights glowed below. "I want to thank all of you," she said softly. "Not for perfection, but for progress." Her eyes met theirs one by one. The Grand Royale is no longer just a hotel. It's a place where people grow, where respect is real, where we see one another as human beings, and that's something no amount of money can buy. The room was quiet, but the silence was full of meaning. Several staff members smiled. Some even wiped their eyes discreetly. They knew she was right. They had all grown in ways that couldn't be measured by reports or ratings. After the meeting, Danielle walked out onto the balcony, the night air cool and soft against her face. The city stretched endlessly before her. Glowing and alive, she leaned on the railing, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. How a simple act of disrespect had turned into a story of redemption. How pain had become purpose. As she looked out at the skyline, she whispered quietly to herself, "Maybe life tests us not to break us but to reveal us." She smiled faintly, her heart full. She knew that the real victory wasn't in titles or power. It was in the moments when people changed, when someone like Ryan learned humility, when someone like Collins rediscovered leadership, when a company rediscovered its soul. The moonlight glimmered on the glass windows of the hotel, and Danielle turned back toward the lobby, ready to head upstairs as she walked. Guests greeted her warmly. Staff smiled genuinely, and she realized something beautiful. Respect had become the new culture, not because it was forced, but because it was lived. Before stepping into the elevator, she glanced back one last time at the restaurant where it had all started. Her lips curved into a soft smile. "It all began with breakfast," she murmured. The doors slid closed gently, the reflection of her calm face fading behind the glass. And in that moment, Danielle knew she had fulfilled her purpose, not just as a CEO, but as a leader with heart, who turned one act of prejudice into a lasting legacy of grace.